So there's a lot of that fear of that abandonment. So it's kind of played out into my adult life some. And it's, I think, I think like the emotional component with my mom, like I just wanted that so bad, that love. And then just like to have that like with my dad, but my dad wasn't there. So I think there's just a lot of times I felt super alone and just, I didn't know how to deal with that. I felt very unloved. So, sometimes I'm still trying to figure that out.
I'm Megan Armstrong. Welcome to Life 6 Feet Above. 6 Feet Above was created when I started to share my story of spending 16 years wanting to be 6 feet under to now living a life full and happy 6 feet above. The more that I started to talk about my journey, my struggles, and my past, the more I realized people were genuinely interested and not judgmental at all, which is what I'd feared for so long. In fact, other people wanted to talk about their story as well, and for some reason they trusted me to do so. So the 6 Feet Above podcast is my way of helping to share other people's stories, finding out what works for them to create a life of happiness. Before we start this episode, I want to let you know it has some explicit language and some very serious subject matter. It may be triggering or sensitive to certain people. Please listen with discretion. This is Kim's story. Well, here we go. You are going to be episode 2 of season 2.
Yes.
And this is one of the one interview, and I look forward to all of them, but this one I've been looking forward to especially so for several reasons. So I'm with Kim Schaper today, and I heard about Kim several months ago, actually when I was unemployed. I had lost my job. And a good friend of mine, she knew my story. She knew that I was in fitness. She knew that I had struggled with body image and eating disorders and, mental health issues. And she said, you should really reach out to this woman, Kim Schaper. And I'm like, I'm not just going to reach out to some random person, but I started following you. And it's crazy the way that the world collides and people's paths cross. We finally connected through my new job at Stat Wellness.
Yes.
So I'm super excited to bring Kim Schaper on today.
You're so sweet. You're going to make me cry over here. Oh, you're so sweet.
Then we start to get to know each other for a second. And you're like, well, my husband works at this place where I used to train at.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait a second. I know Ryan.
Exactly. I know. Small world.
So tell us about yourself, what you're doing right now, and then we'll jump into it.
Sure. Well, first off, like your audience is so lucky to have you. Your podcast is amazing. Your story, everything. Just thank you for putting yourself out there and having the courage to do so, because not a lot of people do.
Appreciate that.
So everyone listening, you're very fortunate. So keep listening and then keep spreading the word.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll take it.
Yes. So about me, kind of where I'm at right now, I would say probably 97% of my business is online. So I really focus on women's health. And it's multifaceted. It's not just one thing. Right. I really started out in the fitness space, and then as time has evolved and I've had my own health struggles, I really wanted to elaborate on that, if you will, and just focus more on whole health. So as you well know, whole health is really mental, physical, emotional, spiritual. So I really like covering a lot of those facets with the majority of my clients. So I would say mainly it's women's health and wellness and that sort of thing.
So how did you get your start in fitness originally? Like how did you, obviously there are a lot of people going into this field now. I think it's one of the fastest growing fields, is not just being a trainer, but overall, like I would call it like wellness coaching, where it's nutrition and it's what you're doing physically and it's what you're thinking about and what, all these things that go into it. But to gain people's trust, you kind of had to be an expert in one area first.
Yes, you nailed it. It's so good. Good job on that. Yes, you're so right. So I would say my expertise at the time was fitness. I kind of dove in 2005. I wasn't ready at that time looking back because I was still struggling with a lot of my eating eating issues.
Okay.
But I got my certification and I dove in 2005, worked for a little while at like LA Fitness. Then I quit and then had to go back into treatment again. And then back in 2010, my basement, like I had a basement out of my house in Alpharetta.
Okay.
And it was freezing cold. There's a baby heater down there. The framing was still up. Like I had 2 sets of dumbbells, no equipment. And I was feeling well mentally and physically, and I was running a pet sitting business at the time. I'm like, and I'm like, you know what? I really miss the fitness piece. Now that I'm healthy and I feel good, I feel like I need to incorporate this again. So I just started randomly reaching out to some people, and they're like, oh my gosh, yes, I want to work out. So it's $10 an hour. I trained them with 2 different sets of dumbbells in my basement, freezing cold, with still all the plywood up and everything. And then from there, I just ended up finishing my basement and got a bathroom down there and like got all this equipment. And I swear people probably thought I was running a brothel down there or something, because people would come up and down the stairs around the side of the house constantly. And it was my safe haven. I went through a really traumatic divorce. And so, I go back and I reflect, like, what was the I don't want to say the safety mechanism. What was the comfort out of being in that relationship? And hands down, I always go back to the basement. Like the basement with my clients was so cathartic for me. And I just really gained a lot with my clients and myself, and it was a great time.
So you were doing this training while you were still married to the ex, or?
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that was like your getaway, your escapism, if you will.
100%. I didn't realize it at the time, but it definitely was. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy to think. I know a lot of times, and this is totally off subject, but a lot of times when we're going through something tragic or traumatic, it's really hard to look at what's going on right then and what might actually be saving us until we get out of it, until years later.
So true.
And you're like, wow, I had no idea at the time that was actually serving me and where I was supposed to go in the future.
Yes. So it's crazy.
Wow.
That's such a great point.
Were you an athlete growing up?
I was. Okay. Yeah. I ran cross country and track and played soccer and tennis, and I loved everything. I was a tomboy for sure.
But you're not from Atlanta, right? You're from...
So I was born in Atlanta, and then I lived in Minnesota for 6 years, and then Mississippi for a year, and then moved back to Atlanta. So I've been here. I'm 40 now. So I've been here for maybe 34 years.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Okay. And your family is originally from Greenville, correct? Like your mother's side.
Yes, exactly. Yep. My mom's from Greenville and my dad's from New York.
Okay. Where in New York?
I don't know. I'm sorry, Dad. I don't know.
I only ask because I'm from New York, and whenever I say I'm from New York, people are like, "Oh, the city." I'm like, "No. There's a whole state. I'm from upstate."
Right,
like
exactly.
they're like Westchester. I'm like, "No. Like closer to Canada." You know?
Yeah.
That's so funny. So for some reason, I thought you did live in Greenville at one point, but you did not.
I did not.
Okay.
No, just my mother. My mother was born and raised there.
Okay. All right. So you're in Atlanta, and you have a sister.
Yes, I have a sister. She's 34.
34.
Yes, so she's 6 years younger than I am.
All right. So we're going to jump way back to the way that you grew up and just how, living with 2 parents who loved each other, adored each other. Kim's mother has a documentary on Amazon Prime, and it's called The Sister's Call. And the first time that Kim and I actually spoke, and she told me a little bit about her story, because I like to do pre-interviews. I like to find out, a little bit more information than just walking in cold with somebody.
I love that you do that, by the way.
So it's interesting. I have talked to other podcasters, and they're like, nope, I just want to do research. I don't want to actually do a pre-interview. And I feel like with my subject matter, it's really important to make sure that the person's ready to put it out there, because it's very sensitive. And it also is like kind of telling me your story first without sitting in front of a mic, knowing that it's going to go on this platform.
Sure.
It just kind of breaks that wall and that barrier. So I appreciate that. And, I don't know why, but I'm really incredibly grateful that people are trusting me with the most personal information pieces that they can give me.
You have you just have such a great energy about you, and just walking into your place. Yeah. It's very magical. It's very spiritual. It's very warm and inviting, and you give off that energy. And so I think people instantaneously feel safe with you.
Which now you're going to make me cry because there were
true.
so many years when I was such in a negative space that I didn't have that. Like people didn't come to me. They didn't trust me. Like they'd come work out with me because I had good energy in that class, but not the rest of my life. And I felt that and I knew it and I perpetuated it.
Interesting.
So it took me a really long time to turn that energy around. So just hearing that is...
Oh, it's so apparent.
Thank you.
So apparent. Like
Thank
as
you.
I'm looking at you, you have like this beautiful aura about you. It's so true.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Did people say you're an empath?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I totally see that. Yeah.
100%.
Okay.
And I think it's because of my story. I think it's because I get it. And I used to judge myself and judge others and judge everything so much that to be an empath, that judgment has to be taken away.
Totally.
It has to be stripped. But a lot of times it's hard to strip that without actually going through it.
I agree.
Wow, we just totally...
It's okay.
I'm
Sorry.
like, thank you. All about me now. Okay.
That's good. I like it.
The day that we talked, you told me about your story, and I knew that you struggled with eating disorders and body image. I knew that you were in fitness and all this, but I had no clue about your family history. And it makes so much sense now because everything that we've gone throughout our life, I really do think goes back to our childhood.
Oh my gosh. It's
at least parts of it, right?
Oh, hands down. It is 100%. Yep.
So your mother has a documentary called A Sister's Call. And, you briefly told me what it was about. And you're like, this is intense. I'm like, okay. And I watched it that night.
I know. I was shocked. I was like, okay, you're
holy
on it.
Holy shit. Like,
Yeah.
Wow. Incredible. Like an incredible, and it's like, it's your sister, it's your, your mother's story, but it's very much your story.
That's interesting. You say that.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay.
And I feel like that because without her going through that, without that happening in your family, you wouldn't be the way that you are today.
Yeah, I don't think I would.
Right?
I don't see it that way, I guess, because I'm in the midst of it. But that's a good point. I never even thought of it like that.
Like that kind of shaped who you are and what happened to you and what happened to, your grandparents and all of that. So let's just dive into it. A Sister's Call. Give us a brief overview, and then we're going to kind of get into little different facets of it.
Sure. So the documentary, it's actually crazy how it all came to fruition. My mom, she was looking for her brother. So long story short, her brother, I think he's maybe 7 or 8 years older than she is. Her brother was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. My mom comes from a really rough childhood. She lost both of her parents to suicide, and her brother, her older brother, was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. He played football in college. He was very well liked. It was a very, their family was kind of like keeping up with the Joneses in a sense. And so Call ended up, her brother, that's why it's A Sister's Call,
right,
ended up going missing, and everyone thought that he died. And even in his high school obituary, they're like, Call passed away. My mom's like, no, there's no way. I know he didn't die. She had already lost both of her parents to suicide. She's like, I know he's still alive. And everyone just would say, Rebecca, you have to give up. Like, he's just not here. And she kept trying. She said, I remember, I'll never forget. She went through so many phone books trying to find his name. At the time, you just went through the yellow pages. And the reason why
How old were you? Sorry. How old were you when this first happened?
I was maybe around 12.
Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah. And so I just remember her going through all these yellow pages, and I'm like, Mom, what are you doing? She's like, I'm trying to find my brother. I'm trying to find him. And he would have been in there, but he went by the name Montana. So yeah. And so he was homeless. Okay. And again, no one could find him. And I don't want to give away how we found him, because I think that's a good part of the story. It's crazy how it happened. Total miracle for sure. Yeah. So we ended up finding him 14 years later. And so my mom then was like, okay, I have to hear about your life. Like, where have you been? What have you been doing? So she got this little handheld camera. And so she started documenting his life. He brought her back to where he was sleeping under the bridge.
Which was crazy. Like,
I know, it's crazy.
That visual, I was like, how does someone survive there?
I know. And the railroad tracks and everything.
Yeah.
And so he basically just gave her a chronicle of his life. And in the beginning, he was very closed off. He didn't like to talk a lot. But then over time, he started opening up a bit more. And, we talked about it as a family. It was my mom's obsession. My mom was purely obsessed with trying to fix Call because she couldn't save her parents. And so it was this ongoing effect. And So it's really just, I found it to be a very therapeutic story for my mom. It was kind of rehabilitating her in a sense from part of her childhood trauma. And Call is no longer here, but he still has a very deep place in our hearts. He was a great guy.
Yeah. It's incredible the way from the point where she found him to, where he ends up. And I think it was like 6 years that she kind of documented, he had some rough patches.
Yeah.
It was very up and down. He had to go back into basically like a psychiatric ward.
Yes.
And then he was living on his own and kind of back and forth. Pretty inspirational though.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of the messaging around it was just, my mom just wanted to show people and tell people that you can love people with mental illnesses. They're not always, my mom is very, very spiritual. And a lot of times we laugh because she can be a little woo woo, but we love her for it. And so she totally believes part of Call's voices was just like another level of spiritual awakening.
Yeah.
And so even though he had this stuff, he was also incredibly intuitive, and it was just a different level of thinking.
Right.
And yes, part of the reasons why he would have these breakdowns is because he would get off of his medication. And so for people that deal with schizophrenia, it's very common for people to quit their meds because it makes them super tired. Just the side effects of the medication is pretty brutal. Gosh. And so, they think, oh, well, I'm stable now, I can get off the meds. Right. But then, once the meds get out of your system, then it creates this whole effect again. And so, yeah.
So did they ever figure out why he was the way that he was? I mean, I'm guessing it's because of your grandparents. So your mother's parents, really struggled with mental illness. And I think we say mental health, and then mental illness is like, someone that is more diagnosed with schizophrenia or something like that, like depression, bipolar, that you do really need external help. Everyone has mental health, just like physical health.
Yep.
And I think we use mental health in the wrong way. I think a lot of people get that confused with mental illness. It's like, it's not that traumatic. Like whether you're obese or whether you're a healthy physical person, you still have a physical health about you.
Yes. Such a great point.
I would love to break that stigma on like mental health, not always people thinking like, oh, you're crazy, you got bipolar or whatever. Like, no. Mental health is just wellness.
Exactly.
Right. So
true.
Your maternal grandparents really, it was almost like when I was watching like the old clips of them, it reminded me of like the Cleavers or something like this, like, everything looked perfect from the outside. Growing up in Greenville, South Carolina, they were probably like, in the 50s, 60s or whatever. And everything was prim and proper. And like your grandma basically had to be perfect all the time.
Yes. She did the debutantes and all that, which is very big here in the South. And so yes, it was a lot of pressure on her.
So it's a lot of pressure to have this external, persona. And internally she was struggling.
Yeah. Hard.
Struggling hard.
Right. And my mom would tell me.
Do you know where that came from?
And it's so hard. I think what gets challenging is because back in that day, they didn't understand what was really going on. So my mom would tell me, she said, I really think my mom had schizophrenia too, because they would stand outside and her mom would say, oh, you see that? Like, don't you see that person? And my mom's like, no, there's no one there. And she's like, yeah, there is. There's someone over there. And then my mom would say that she would beat her head against the bathtub and be like, I just can't get these voices out of my head. And then she went through, I think it was like 40 treatments of electric shocks. And
I remember seeing that.
And so, and I do know once she was married to my grandfather for a period of time, it progressively became worse. And so I think that was part of it as well. And my grandfather had severe depression too. And then I do know that he also abused my uncle, Call. So I think that triggered stuff too. And that's part of the reason why he left.
Okay.
So there's a lot there.
I was wondering that. So, this is important because it very much trickles down to your mother and it trickles down to you. So this isn't just about like your grandparents. Like there's a reason, there's a method to my madness. Your grandfather, did your mom know how depressed he was growing up? Or did she realize like that he was different from other fathers as far as like the way he behaved or what he said to her? Yep.
So she said it was very interesting. She told me that she did not understand what was going on until she watched the Phil Donahue show back in 1991. And Phil Donahue started talking about sexual abuse. And, and my mom goes, oh my gosh, that's that's me. That's what happened to me. And my mom, I think, was just kind of, I don't want to say checked out, but she didn't realize that a lot of what he was doing was not normal. Okay. My grandfather treated my mom like she was a wife. Because
your grandmother was put in these psychiatric wards over and over and over. Yep. So it was almost like, I don't know, again, I'm no psychiatrist or whatever, but I think he was like trying to replace that role with your mom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So he took his own daughter and put her in this like wife role and sexually molested her.
Right. Right.
At how old?
How long did it went on for a long time for my mom.
Like 5 or 7 years or something.
Yeah, it was a while.
Because they kind of recapped it. Like it was more about like your mother finding her brother, but they did touch on all of this because it very much explains why all this stuff happened.
Right. Yeah.
And do you know if your grandmother knew that was happening?
That's a really good question. I've never asked my mom that. I don't know. And I just know she was sick for so long and she was so out of it. And she was also medicated with so many drugs and would mask with alcohol. So I think she might have, and maybe that might have been one of the reasons why she drank as much as she did. I don't know the answer to that.
But it's like in the 50s or in the 60s, you know, what is a woman like that going to say?
Right.
And everyone thinks she's crazy anyways, because she's saying she sees people. So she like stands up for her daughter and is like, oh, you shouldn't be doing this. Like no one's going to believe that. Right.
Right.
I feel like nowadays, at least we have come so far as women and females that people are actually, they still may not believe everything we say, but at least they're listening to us.
Yep.
So that's huge. But also, you know, when your mom, so your mom was watching the Donahue show and she realizes like what my father did to me is not normal. Right. And how did it affect her?
You know, I think she married my dad young. She was 19 and my dad was 21. Her father wanted her to marry young. I think back in the day that was part of the thing too.
Right.
You know, I don't think she realized how much it affected her until she had perpetual anxiety. She could never sit still. And I think her running, her exercise was her means of dealing with it, escape. Yeah. She never used drugs. She never drank alcohol. She never did really any of that. It was mainly her way of just numbing out. So she would stay super active all the time. And really just, I don't think she realized the magnitude of what had happened. And that was her escape.
Yeah.
That was,
And also like back then, like if no one's talking about it, you just think, okay, maybe everyone else maybe their parents do this to them too. Like you don't know growing up.
Don't. You really don't.
However you grow up is your normal, right? Our reality is very much our reality because if that's what we believe and that's what we live and eat and breathe, like that's our normal.
Exactly.
So we don't realize that the way it can affect us until like 10, 20, 30 years later sometimes. And it all kind of comes and surfaces. And, you know, watching this documentary, seeing how much I want to, again, this is just from an outsider looking in, but I think you struggled, you and your sister and your dad struggled because your mom gave finding her brother so much attention.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably hard to understand that when you're in it, but like looking from the outside, I think it's because she had lost her parents and that's all she had left. Right. That's the only, you know, the only real blood other than passing, you know, generation down, like the only real bloodline that she had left.
Yeah.
And she probably felt like she had a duty. She had a job to find him and take care of him. And I do think she kind of lost, taking care of you as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, a little bit, not to blame her.
No, for sure.
The way it happened.
The way it happened. Right. Yeah. And I don't fault her for that because if I was in the same position, I would do the same thing.
Right.
And I knew my mom was very angry when we spoke about that because that was the first time at that dinner table scene that all of us had really told her how we felt. Yeah. So she really was hurt by that. She had to process it a lot, but she said, you have no idea. He's my brother. Like, how could I just turn on him?
Like if your sister, if that happened to your sister, you would do the same thing. Yep. You know, and it's very quick to judge and be like, well, I could have still paid attention. If you had a family, still pay attention to my family too. It's like, you don't know until you're in it.
I totally agree.
Thick of things.
Yes. Yep.
So it came out in the documentary that not only, your grandfather did that to your mother, but he did that to you too. Which I was like, when it got to that part, I was like, I felt like someone like stomped on my heart. Because I felt so many different emotions. A, I felt for you because I can't even imagine. And B, I felt for your parents because especially your dad. I think your dad said it so well. He's like, we should have known. How could we have left Kim with your father, Rebecca? Like he was saying that to his own wife. Like, how did we do that? Like they felt like they failed as parents.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, maybe they did.
Yeah.
Because if somebody does that to a loved one, it's like when somebody cheats, you know, it's like, oh, they cheated on their past girlfriend. They're not going to do it to me. You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
So how old were you when that happened? Do you remember your grandfather? Do you remember him well? Like, as much as you're open to talking about it.
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
You know, I was around, I think it started kind of around 7.
Okay.
And I remember a lot of great things about my grandfather.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if you remember Teddy Ruxpin.
Yes.
I don't know if you're,
oh my gosh, that little bear that you turned on.
Yes.
This is how old we are.
I know. So he got me Teddy Ruxpin. I was so excited for that. And he would take me on trips and we would have fun. And he was very loving, very doting. He would buy me a bunch of things and I would go for Christmas and I would be excited to see him.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, it was like, I would be sleeping and he would come in the room and fondle me and touch me. And
really,
I just didn't know any different. And I just remember there was a time I was in one of the bedrooms and he had come in and he was touching me and like fondling me. And I remember looking out towards the window, but it was a picture. There was a picture there. It wasn't a window, but it was a picture. And I just remember looking at that picture being like, what's going on? Like something just doesn't feel right. And I never said anything. Like at the time I didn't think it was abnormal.
Right.
And then I thought, you know, in my mind, it was very confusing for me because on one side, like I loved my grandpa, like he was doing all these amazing things for me. And then on the other side, I just thought, okay, well, this is just kind of part of it.
Yeah.
And then I'll tell you, Megan, the most traumatic piece for me in all of this is that, and it's always so embarrassing to say, and I always get so upset when I say it, but around that time, like around when I was like 10, I was watching these 2 twins, or their parents were there, but they were maybe 4-ish, I guess. And I got a Mr. Potato Head and I was inserting it in one of the girls' vaginas. She had 2 of them, as a boy and a girl, and they're twins.
Yeah.
And I remember just like ramming it in her vagina and she's crying. And I'm like, no, this is what you're supposed to do. And I remember like taking a bean bag and putting it over their faces and sitting on it. I'm like, and I just remember those things. And those are the things that hurt the most because I think, gosh, did I hurt them? And did that affect them? And I had a lot of anger and I didn't understand where the anger was coming from. Like I just felt really mad a lot.
Yeah.
And I also felt very alone. I felt really, I felt sad.
Yeah.
And I think that was part of my depression too. My mom would say that like around 10 or so, I would say, I just want to go in the middle of the road and get run over. Like, I just want to get run over. And
she never asked why, like it never came up. Are kids just embarrassed? Do they feel like they're going to disappoint their parents if they say something is wrong? Yeah.
I don't know, you know, and I have to be honest, like, and I've never really said this before, and this is nothing against my mom.
Yeah.
I love my mom wholeheartedly, but she was checked out, like just, you know, emotionally and physically, she's checked out. Yeah. And when I was in high school, even if I got sick, I remember having strep throat a lot and I would have to be in bed and I was sleeping and my mom would always leave. She was just like, I have to get out of here. I can't deal with this. And I remember asking her, I'm like, Mom, why do you leave when I'm sick?
Yeah.
Like, why don't you take care of me? And she would say, Kim, I'm just so angry. I was so sick of taking care of everybody. And I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, I'm your daughter, you know? And she's like, in her mind, she felt like she had to take care of everybody for so long.
Right.
She just felt anger about it. And of course it's okay. I don't fault her for that. But there's a lot of stuff there with my mom.
Yeah.
You know? So we've had our times.
You say
sure.
It's okay. And like, I don't fault her for that. And I think like, I still know like even as adults, we always want to protect our parents, just like our parents want to protect us. And sometimes I think it's okay to be like, yeah, that was fucked up, you know? And as much as that might hurt her, it's also part of the healing process.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we like sugarcoat things, especially after we've gotten through them, because we don't want to remember how bad it was.
Yeah.
But it's also, again, it's part of that healing process to be like, it was really bad. You did really do a bad job at that point in my life.
Right.
You know?
It's true. And honestly, as kids, we need our parents so badly. We need that stability. And I think after all the therapy I've gone through, a lot of it was the emotional connection I didn't really have with my mom.
Right.
She was there, but she wasn't. Like
Right.
her physical presence was there. And I always remember she would be at home every time I came home from school. How was your day? How was your day? And I remember that. And that was so sweet to me. And then at the same time, emotionally, it was just very absent.
Right.
She didn't help me with my period. Like I had to kind of figure that out. And there was just checked out.
Yeah.
And then, my dad traveled all the time and he wasn't really home. So there's a lot of that fear of that abandonment. So it's kind of played out into my adult life some. And it's, I think,
It's okay.
yeah, I think like
It's all good.
like the emotional component with my mom, like I just wanted that so bad, that love. And then just like to have that like with my dad, but my dad wasn't there. So I think there's just a lot of times I felt super alone and just, I didn't know how to deal with that. I felt very unloved.
Yeah.
So, sometimes I'm still trying to figure that out.
I think this is, it just goes to show that wounds are there.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And it's probably going to, like, I talk to people all the time. They're like, oh, you don't take medication anymore. And I'm like, no, but I still struggle with depression. Like, it's always going to be there.
Sure.
Just like an alcoholic, like they're always going to be cognizant of that and aware of that and have to stay away from certain things. So I think it's great that these emotions are so like surface level, because it means that you've dealt with it and you allowed yourself, because when people don't want to deal with anything,
right,
they push it down and they replace it with something else.
Of course.
They replace it with anger or whatever else.
Yeah.
They replace it. So the fact that something, even though you're over it, quote unquote, right, you've gotten through it, it doesn't mean it didn't exist. It's still there.
It's still there.
And you remember how sad you were at that age. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And that's important for a lot of people, because I think that's why we should talk about this stuff.
I totally agree. Right.
And it's okay.
Yeah. And I think that's why there's such a stigma attached to this, and why I'm so grateful you're doing what you're doing, because I think some people might say, oh, well, they've got it all. Or, like Megan, like you look amazing and you have a great life and you're healthy. It's like, no, you don't know. I still deal with stuff too.
Yeah.
So I think it's very taboo. Some people get very caught up in the surface level stuff.
Right.
And I like deep shit. I like to go deep, and I like people that are deep, and I like people that have really struggled, because I get it. And that's where the depth is for me.
Yeah. And that's how, I think the way the world connects at the root of all things is with deep emotional trauma. Like, okay, we connect on Instagram because your picture looks great and has 500 likes. But like when you hear someone's story and struggle and you can relate to little bits and pieces of what they went through, even if someone's never been, molested by a father, I can relate to your story of depression and not feeling good enough and not feeling valued. And like, it was a different thing for me. Like my mom was there, but it's the same feeling that I had. So it's so important that, grief is grief, pain is pain. I say this all the time. Yeah. But the different circumstances that create that sort of emotion are different for everybody, but the emotion is the same. And whether you're 10 years old or 95 years old, what makes you sad, and that feeling, that feeling where you just want to break down and cry is the same for a 10-year-old and a 95-year-old.
Absolutely.
Like your emotions are always there.
Absolutely.
So our kids are seeing us adults not dealing with the depression, not dealing with the anxiety, not dealing with all of this stuff. So that's their normal.
Yeah.
So now if they can see us starting to deal and talking about this and putting this on this, platform that I hope people actually listen to and care enough to share, that maybe they can look inside what they're doing as adults and be like, holy shit, this is going to get passed to my kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I don't do something about it.
That's a huge, right. And I think I talk to so many women that they're petrified of that. They're like, my daughter's already starting to pick up on my behaviors. And sometimes I have to check myself because I get angry because I'm like, why don't you just fix it then? You know? But
and kids are so smart and they're so smart. Intuitive.
Oh my gosh, they are.
They get it.
They do. And they watch. They're huge what they watch and they replicate versus someone could tell them, oh, you're beautiful. But then you see the mom constantly sizing herself up and picking her body apart. And the daughter's going to do the same thing.
Were you diagnosed with depression in your teens or how did all of that kind of happen and your mom finally see, okay, Kim does need help? Did she get you professional help or?
Yeah. Okay. So, in and out of high school, I knew I did at the time, I fully wasn't comprehending it, but I was depressed, just sleeping a bunch and just feeling really down. College, same thing. I would sleep a ton. I lost a lot of motivation. Looking back, I definitely was like not living my best life. Right. I mean, of course I wasn't eating that well and I wasn't sleeping much because it was college, but I was still struggling pretty hard. And then when I came home after my first year of college, it was when, I don't know, they say, and I don't know the science behind it, but something where like around the onset of 19 to 21 is when something with your brain is still changing or something. And you can have like a switch. Yeah.
Like a trigger.
Yes. And so I don't know exactly what the trigger was, but that's when my anorexia started like really bad. And then once the anorexia came on, like the depression came on like tenfold. Yeah. And so I went into treatment for my anorexia and then they put me like, I don't know, like this, $1 million calorie diet, but then they had to hurry up and get out because insurance ran out. So that's a huge problem now is that they think, oh, if you make weight, then you're fine. Right. It's like, okay, what about all the coping tools that I need? Yeah. So I got out and struggled hard. And then I kind of swung to the other end and gained, I think it was like 100 and something pounds within a year. Wow. And I was just emotionally eating, stuffing, binging and purging, really depressed then too. And so it was very interesting how you're treated on either end of the spectrum. Yeah. And then I went in treatment again. And I did get better at that time. I started feeling a little bit better. They put me on a proper medication to help with my depression. And then I started, moving and getting active again and taking care of myself. And I felt great. And yet still at my core, I felt unworthy. And so then I'm like, okay, let me do fitness shows and then let me do, professional cycling and let me do triathlons and let me go on every diet. And it's like, that was my way to cope and try and fulfill that void within myself. And so,
do you think in some ways, when something's going on with us, emotionally, we fill it up with other things?
Oh, like totally.
We're like, okay, let me just keep busy. Let me do this. Let me do that. Was that what it was for you?
Absolutely. It was men and it was food or body stuff.
Really?
They went hand in hand. So it would be where if it was always like I was in some sort of abusive relationship,
really?
Or mentally, physically, emotionally. Yeah. I would pick men who are just, I remember I dated this one guy and he's like, yeah, I made this list of what I want in a woman. Number one is she has to have below 10% body fat. That was my number one. And I'm sitting here. I mean, I remember looking back now, you have to laugh about it. I'm like, what a douchebag, But yeah, I would date the biggest douches ever. And so, yeah. And then what would happen is they would be kind of emotionally abusive or they were fully focused on the exterior.
Right.
And that made me want to focus on the exterior more. And then I lost a sense of myself and my self-worth went down. And because they were so insecure, they would put me down. And then they just, the eating disorder stuff and the men went hand in hand always.
It's just cyclical, right? It's like you get in this spiral and then you don't feel good about yourself, but you don't want to break up with somebody because that's all you have. And
sure.
Then,
Yep.
It just keeps going downhill.
Yeah.
So at what point, and people have asked me this before, and it's like, I don't know. There wasn't like a day. There wasn't a catalyst. It was like a random day that I woke up and I'm like, fuck this. I do not want to live this way anyway, but I don't want to die either. So, okay, here we go.
Yeah.
So do you remember when you had that kind of like, Something needs to be done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was 2 times.
Okay.
So the first one was I was going into my 6th treatment center. Okay. This is when I was maybe 27.
Okay.
Okay. And again, this is my 7th treatment center, in and out.
Treatment for eating disorders.
disorder, depression,
Okay.
anxiety.
Everything.
Yep.
Okay.
So I remember I was sitting in the bathtub and I was just a hot mess. Like I'd still been binging and purging a lot, and I just felt awful, like mentally and physically. Yeah. And I'm like, I just don't want to live here anymore. I want to die. And so I went downstairs and I told my mom, I'm like, Mom, like I have to get help. I'm done. I'm over this. I have to get well. So they checked me into Emory, and then I was at Emory for a week, and then they brought me down to a place in Florida. And it's called Renfrew, and I was there for a year. Wow. And so that was a pivotal moment for me. Got out of there, and looking back now, I probably should not have met my first husband at that time. I was still at a very vulnerable point, getting out of treatment.
Right.
And he saw that and took advantage of that. He's just a total narcissist, sociopath, what have you. So I thought I was okay. Yeah. You know, we got married, yada, yada. That's a whole other story. Dr. Phil Donahue contacted me, or not Phil Donahue. Dr. Phil.
No way.
Yes. Twice to get on his show about the story. It's a whole story. It's like a whole nother thing.
We're going to have a part 2. It's
crazy. Like it's crazy. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I want to hear that, but we'll let's do a part 2.
Done.
It's already on the radar.
Okay. Fair enough. And so after that, you know, I was traumatized from that for sure. And, then I still didn't work through a lot of the trauma with what happened with my grandfather. Mm-hmm. So I went back to treatment one more time. And that's when I was really like, okay, I got to really focus hard and get well. It was an all women's center. It was the best thing I ever did. They're closed down now.
I was going to say you're, because I remember this from the documentary, your parents didn't know that your grandfather did that to you for a long time.
No, for a long time.
When did you finally tell them?
When I was 19.
Oh,
my first treatment center.
The first treatment center. Okay. So they knew by then. All
exactly.
Right. But this is your late 20s and you still hadn't dealt with it. So 10 years later, and it's still there.
Yep. Yeah. Still there. Yeah. And I think a lot of the treatment centers were so focused on fixing the eating or, you know, the anxiety, but it's like, it was so much deeper than that. And we never really got to that.
Yeah.
And so that was a big part of it. And it was also my responsibility because I didn't go there yet.
Right.
And so when I went to this all women's facility, I was there for 3 months. It was the best thing I ever did. But the thing that kept me going and really moving on a track to wellness was after I got out of treatment, I spent a year every week for a year going to my therapist. And that was a game changer. That really got me well because you can, for people that have been in rehab, you can go and it's very structured and like you can be fine because there's not as many triggers. But then you get out into real world and you have a lot of stress. Right. There's a lot of triggers. You get fired up again. It's easy to go back to your old behaviors. So for me, it was like, I have to stay on top of this and continue to get well. And
consistency is key.
Hands
Whether
down.
It's physical fitness or mental wellness.
It really is. It's always
so true.
Yep.
So true. But also like being able to take responsibility. And for me, my life started to change. It took several years after like making this like aha moment, but it wasn't until I was like, this is on you, girlfriend. Like when I looked in the mirror and like, I can't blame anyone else,
right?
You know? Right. And it's not that whatever happened to me, like you and what happened with your grandfather, that is not your fault,
right?
But it's your responsibility to, and it sucks you got dealt a really shitty hand, but unfortunately that's your life, right? That's what was given to you. And now this has become your story. Yeah.
And cause I this might come across as being kind of bad, but like I have a hard time with people that are constantly in the victim mindset, 100%. Because it's like, you got to shit or get off the pot, right? Like we all have our stuff and what are you going to do about it? Right. Rather than saying how miserable you are, constantly talking about it. What are you going to do to change it?
Right.
And action to me is everything.
Yes. So I think we're very similar because I'm very like tough love, and that's like how I was raised. And my dad's just like a, you know, like hockey player, like, you know, just like you get through things, you don't talk about emotions, all this stuff. But I felt that way for a very, very long time once I kind of got through it myself. But I have found this new compassion and this new grace for people like that because I remember I was there. Yeah. I was in that space. And I wish that there had been someone like me to at least tell my story and say something like that without judging, right? We're not placing judgment on them. We're just saying like, listen, girlfriend or dude, whoever you are listening, like, you have to take a good look in the mirror. And if you're not happy with something in your life, you have to take responsibility for it. And the more that you're like, oh, well, I can't do this, or, oh, this is happening, or whatever. It's like, that is an outside source. Like you are only responsible for what you do and what you think and the habits that you create. And your life is your responsibility, and your happiness is very much based on what you do every day, habitually, day in, day out, and it's consistent. And if you're not ready to do that and you sit there and you're like, oh, I want to make this change in my life. I'm like, no, you don't.
Right.
You really don't.
You really don't.
That's okay.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you that I didn't make that change for a long time, but I did eventually.
Right.
So when you're ready and you're ready to, you know, decide that you don't want to live a certain way anymore, you know, then these things that we do now might help you. So what I like to do is really give people like tangible ways that help each of my, that have helped each one of my guests, because what worked for me isn't always going to work for you. What you did isn't going to work for someone else. But if people can start to take a little bit of this guest and this guest and this person, like, they can kind of piece together what works for them.
And I've got some great tools in my toolbox.
Let me hear them all.
So one of the best therapies I ever did was dialectical behavioral therapy. I'm not sure if you know that's the best.
No.
So it's what I love about it is it's very different than cognitive behavioral therapy because for me, what I found, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners can probably resonate with this, is I would get very emotional, be very heightened, right? You have the wave of emotion and there's a peak and you don't know how to handle your emotions. Some of us are very like emotionally desensitized and can't regulate our emotions, right? And they feel very catastrophic. So I would go into therapy. I would cry. I would express everything. I would leave. And then I might have one of those moments again. And I'm like, how do I handle my emotions? I have to go see my therapist right away. And so what I loved about DBT is they give you specific, tangible tools to use when you're in that like emotional dysregulation. And those for me were game changers.
Like what?
Yep.
What?
I love to share.
Yeah,
okay.
Tell us.
So one thing I love is when our brains are spinning and we're like our thoughts are going, we're having like obsessive thoughts and we can't slow down. Usually that's when we're time traveling. So we're either looking to the future or looking to the past. And usually the future creates anxiety and usually the past can create depression. So when you're having those thoughts, one of the best things you can do is look down at your feet. And when you look down at your feet, it grounds you and it brings you right back to the present moment. And it's like, okay, no, I'm okay. Yeah. I'm looking at my feet right now. This is where I'm at right now.
Okay.
And if that still doesn't work, one thing I do all the time, if my head's still spinning, I will pick something apart. So we're here in a room and I will look at some tangible object, and you have a bird on the wall with leaves, and I would say the color of the bird's blue. It has black wings. It's sitting on a branch. The branch is brown. And you find when you pick something apart like that, it brings you right back to the present moment rather than you still spinning. It brings you right back. So that's one great
that's good
grounding technique. Another thing I love is opposite action. That's a big one. Yeah. So when we want to go back to what we currently do, even though we know it's not working. So let's say that you have, the way I visualize it is you have two paths. You have one that's paved and clean and one that you go down to all the time, but yet it's not working anymore. And then you have this other path where there's tons of branches and, there's gravel everywhere and you're going to have to clean it up. And so it's easy to stay on the paved path, even though it's not fun and it's not working anymore. So you try this other path, but it feels scary. Like you have to move all the branches and you have to, fix the gravel so it doesn't hurt your feet, and it's uncomfortable. But the more you continue to work on that unpaved path, the more it becomes clear and you're like, oh, this feels great. Okay, this isn't so bad. And then before you know it, that paved path you thought was once working for you, you don't even want to go down that path anymore because it doesn't feel as good. Right. So I like to say when you want to act on an impulse or do something like a negative behavior, so maybe it might be like binge eating or, drugs or alcohol or whatever, instead of acting on that impulse, do something else in place of that.
Right.
So maybe you call a friend or you go for a walk or a drive.
Right.
And then yes, the intensity will wear off, even though it feels so hard in that moment.
Yep.
The intensity will wear off, and then your brain will start to say, okay, I'm going to do the opposite. The craving won't be as intense,
right,
because you're doing something opposite, but it's so hard in the moment. It's hard.
It is hard, but it's a habit that has to be broken consistently.
Exactly.
And it doesn't mean that like you're going to fall off the wagon. You're going to go back to that binge eating one day and like, it's totally normal. You just can't stay there.
Yes. Right.
And you can't judge yourself for it.
Correct.
You know, because our brain is going to do what we've done over and over and over. And even when you break that habit, it can still happen again.
It totally will. And it will. And giving yourself compassion and grace that it will happen again.
Yeah.
And knowing that, okay, it's going to be okay. Yes, this is a behavior you've done for so long.
Right.
So the self-awareness is huge.
Right.
And then if you go down that route, instead of staying stuck there, what can you do to kind of get back on and regulate yourself again? So,
right. And I also think we try to fix everything all at once.
Yes, we do.
We're so overwhelmed with, the job, the kids, this, that. It's like, okay, let's focus. And this is what helps me is I'm like, okay, for this 1 week, I need to focus on this.
I love that.
And then I get to the end of the week and I'm like, oh my God, like I'm going to use, bulimia for an example, just because it's my easiest thing to use. So when I would get through a week and I was like, for me, I would go to drive-thrus and I would just eat all the food I could. I could order it because I felt like such a fraud as a fitness instructor in LA walking in to somewhere and ordering food. So I would sit in my car or I would order food at home. So if I was at home and I'm like, and my go-to was so stupid, this Pizza Hut.
Yeah.
That was my go-to. And I would be home alone and I would just binge and feel really good at the time.
Of course. Yeah.
Right. So I either got in my car and drove somewhere else and got out of my car and did a walk so that I didn't have that, like, I couldn't order something because I wasn't at home anymore.
Right.
Or if I was driving around LA and wanting to stop at drive-thrus, I would get on the phone and call someone because I couldn't say, hey, hang on, I got to place an order for, double cheeseburger, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
So, and then I'd get through a week and I'd be like, oh my God, I didn't do that this week, and then you give yourself a pat on the back and then you go to the next week and then you add one more thing into it and then you add one more thing into it. So it's really easy to get overwhelmed and then you kind of just give up on everything.
Right.
I wasn't trying to fix my depression. I was just trying to get through that 1 week without doing that habit that I knew really wasn't good for me.
Right. I love that so much. It's like mastering that one thing.
Yes.
And once you master that, add something else.
Right.
Otherwise, by trying to take on too much, then we get overwhelmed and throw in the towel.
Yeah.
There's a great book, The One Thing. I forgot who wrote it, but it's a fantastic book.
Okay.
I highly
talks
recommend
about this sort of thing.
Yep.
Interesting. So I do want to get back to any more like specific examples you have, but one thought I just had was, what was it that made you go downstairs and tell your mom you wanted to get help? Like, why were you kind of at the end of your rope where you're like, I want to get better? Because I think for a lot of people, they're like looking for a sign or like wanting to figure out a way to like just admit that they wanted to get help.
I put my ego aside and I'm like, I remember just suffering so hard in that moment. I felt awful and I was so sick and tired of trying to do it my way.
Yeah.
I'm so stubborn anyway, but constantly trying to do it my way and not get the response that I wanted. I'm like, okay, I've got to stop trying to do it my way because it's not working.
Right.
And I think once you kind of accept that and embrace that what you're doing is not working, you're repeating the behavior and you're getting the same outcome.
Right.
Like how many more times do you have to do that to recognize it? And then for me, I had to be at like utter suffering to do something about it. And unfortunately, that's how a lot of people work, where it's like they feel like absolute crap or, they've done behaviors for so long that they feel like, sick or super unhealthy. And that's when they decide to do something different. But I don't know. I think just in that moment, I had just never felt so just awful, like mentally and physically. And I'm just like, I can't do it anymore.
Did you ever talk about, I'm sure you did in your therapies and stuff, but how much a role of genetics plays in your family? I mean, that's pretty obvious with, your mother and your grandparents,
both taking their own lives.
Yeah. So, I've had to check myself because, I lost both my grandparents to suicide. My uncle has paranoid schizophrenia. So there's a lot of that on my mom's side. And so for a long time, I'm like, okay, I can muster through it. I don't need medication. I just need to try and white knuckle my way through. But one thing I'm so passionate about, and that I try and release the stigma too, is it doesn't have to be this all or nothing.
Right.
Because at one point I was on 17 medications. Jeez. I was so over medicated and I was a walking zombie. And then I knew something wasn't right. And so that was a big part of why I'm doing the work now, because you have to sometimes go against the grain and trust yourself that at the end of the day, you have to be the CEO of your own health. Mm-hmm. You do. You can't expect even doctors to fix it for you. Women are so intuitive. We know when something's off.
Yeah.
And so for me, after that time, after being on those meds for so long, I'm like, Kate, no, that's not right either. And so that's when I really started doing a lot more research, and I wanted to see, okay, how can I heal myself naturally?
Yeah.
And where I'm at now, it's not black or white. It's not like I'm okay, all holistic, all Eastern medicine, or all Western. Let me drug up myself. It's both. To this day, I still need medication. Do I need 17? No, I need 3. Do I, still make sure that I'm getting essential nutrients and B vitamins and whatever? Yes, for sure. So, I make sure I have a balance of both. And that's what's been fantastic for my health.
Yeah. And so I was on medication for bipolar and depression for several years. And it was like a maturity thing and like kind of growing out of it and kind of just taking better care of myself that I was like, I think I'm ready to go off of these medications. Mm-hmm. But one thing that I was concerned about was like, I've treated my body so badly with binging and purging and all of that. Like, what are these medications doing to my liver, to all of my organs and the functionality of my body and on the inside, that I really wanted to get off of them, but was also I had to look at myself and be like, okay, Megan, like, yes, you want to be off of them, but let's be honest, you struggle. So if there comes a point in your life when you need to go back on them, you have to. You've done so much work and you're going to have to go back on them if you go off of them and this works for a while. So I'm always very open to the fact that like, it's always still there.
Yeah.
I pray that I don't have to go back on them, but if I do, I do. And like, what's the big deal?
Yeah.
So what kind of effects can these drugs have, especially on women and their hormones?
Yeah, it's so hard. I mean, yes, talking about the liver detoxification stuff, some of the kidney stuff for sure. I sometimes I think birth control can be really bad too. I mean, definitely a lot of hormonal issues around that.
Right.
Here's the thing though, is that the way I see it too, some women are so anxious and they feel very unsettled, and stress is a killer on the body too.
Right.
So sometimes it's like, okay, maybe you need a little medication just to take the edge off.
Yep.
So you're not constantly flailing and feeling so stressed out all the time.
Yep.
And reducing some of those, impulses. I think there's so many medications out there. It's hard to say what side effects will be what.
Yeah.
I know some of them can include like weight gain or fatigue or a little bit of brain fog or muscle cramping, nausea. Trying to get off a lot of my medication, I had a ton of side effects. So that's brutal too. So if I can spit one out there, I'll tell you, Effexor is brutal to come off.
That's what I was on.
Oh my gosh. How on earth did you get off that?
Very slowly. Very slowly. Yes.
Yep. It's brutal. It's one of the worst.
But that was one that actually I had to go off because it made me, it actually, it did the opposite of what it was supposed to do.
Yeah.
It made me crazy.
Yeah.
So, and I don't say that to like knock on people that are actually struggling with schizophrenia.
Sure.
It made me do things that I wouldn't normally do.
Like mania stuff?
Yeah. So that was a period of my life when I drove home from college and broke into my boyfriend at the time. I broke into his house. Like I climbed his fire escape.
Oh, wow.
Broke into his house. And it was like,
for what?
We were going through a breakup and I was pissed and I like wanted to take everything back from him. I took everything back that I'd given him, put it in my car and drove to my parents' house.
Wow.
And like I woke up the next day and it was almost like I blacked out. It was like, wait a second. Like I wouldn't normally do that. Like, yes, I'm not in a good place, but like that me actually physically going to do that doesn't seem like something I would do.
It's like out of body experience.
Yeah. And that's when they re-diagnosed me with bipolar instead of depression. And they're like, okay, you actually need to be on a mood stabilizer. Effexor is not the drug for you. Like, but wow, that's so crazy. I didn't even think about that until now.
Yeah. So oh my gosh, that one was brutal to come off of. The side effects of coming off are just, they're hard too.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's the lesser of two evils.
I know.
Right. So if you're anxious and that's going to make you unhealthy, you know, and you need medication, then go on medication.
Right.
Like it's not the end of the world.
Right.
I would just say, educate yourself.
Yep.
And be really aware and really in tune with your own body and what you need.
And also recognizing that a pill is not going to fix you.
Absolutely.
Right? Like
100%.
And I wholeheartedly believe that so many times people are like, I just need an antidepressant as a quick fix.
Right.
But it's like, okay, you got to look at what else is going on. So, you know, therapy and medication if needed go well, but you know, the medication for me is more just to function at a normal level.
Right.
Everything else is
a bonus.
Work.
Yeah. So, and also, you know, if you're not ready to go and dig into your past and really figure out why you are the way that you are, a pill's not going to make any difference. It might help you get by,
right?
But it's not going to.
It's a Band-Aid.
100%. So, what other, you know, day-to-day things that you do that really keep you, and do you struggle still? Like, do you have those days when you're like, just take me off this earth?
I mean, you know, not to that point, thank goodness. But I will say, if in the winter time, and I'm so grateful, I don't know what it was about this winter time, but winter time is always a challenge for me.
Same.
And when it rains a bunch and it's dark, I struggle with that. Like, I need sunshine. So I, every single day, not if it's pouring, but every day I go for a walk and get outside. And there's something about nature and something about being outside that's very therapeutic, and research has proven that over and over again. So that is a non-negotiable for me. I walk every day. Ryan's like, Kim, you're crabby. Do you need to go for a walk? I'm like, yep. So I go for my walks. I try and eat vegetables. I try and get a lot of micronutrients. So, you know, yes, I make sure I eat like enough protein and carbs and healthy fats, but I also make sure I'm getting enough, like, you know, kale and apples and carrots and whatever.
Which up until recently, no one really talked about the way that your gut works with different foods really does affect you mentally.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
And growing up, like, I don't know about you, but I was a swimmer. Like, I could eat whatever I wanted.
Yes.
I never gained a pound. And then like, that probably didn't help what I was going through in my teenage years.
I know.
Looking back to it, but no one knew. Right. And that's the thing. Like, if you've had an eating disorder, and I see it over and over again, is like, you're going to have low stomach acid. You're going to have like gut dysbiosis. So, you know, bacteria that might not need to be there, or vice versa. And then gut health is paramount, like gut brain health. It's so important. Omega-3 fatty acids. I swear by those. Magnesium. Holy basil is great. It's a great herb. Ashwagandha is great too, you know, for stress. I really try and moderate my stress, because that's what kind of sends me over the edge sometimes. Sleep is, again, non-negotiable. I'm not someone that can live off 5 or 6. I wish I was, but I need 8. Same.
Otherwise I'm major squirrel. Like, I have so many squirrels in that attic. It's like, So those are, I would say, those trying to eat healthy. And again, it's not like I'm, not where I'm like super obsessive
about it,
where it's like, no, I can only eat clean or this. I mean, we'll go I mean, I love tequila, be honest, love tequila. I have to keep that in check too, though, because drinking can make me a little depressed. But I mean, I love Mexican chips, pizza, but I try and only do that, you know, occasionally.
So I say everything in moderation, including moderation.
Agreed. So it's eating healthy most of the time, moving in some capacity. And again, it's not like you have to crush yourself at the gym, but just movement, and sleep. And then like laughter, I've noticed I need, like, especially with work and how stressful that can get, we need laughter. We need silliness. And that's very important for me,
like,
too.
Everyone takes things way too seriously.
They do.
You know, it's like, at the end of the day, we're all going to the same place at some point. Like, let's just have a little fun.
Exactly.
You know? So what's your relationship like with your parents now?
You know, it's good. I'm very self-sufficient and independent. And I've also noticed that I don't receive their love as well as I would like.
Really?
So that's something I'm working on. My sister is very close with my parents. She's younger too.
Okay.
But for myself, like I love my parents, and I'm also trying to work on having that relationship where I'm not so independent, where I'm receptive of their love.
Yeah.
And that's something I still struggle with a little bit. It's like, no, I'm hard. I'm this warrior. I don't need your love, but I do.
Right. Right.
But I love them so much, and it's great. And, my mom will piss me off and I'll piss her off. And the problem is we're similar. So then we just like piss each other off, but then we laugh about it. But my dad's awesome. And my sister's great. So yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
What a story.
Yeah.
You're like so inspirational.
Well, so are you.
Thank you. It's like hearing your whole story, I'm like mind blown. And the biggest thing for me, and this is what I tell myself, is this was not an overnight success.
No.
Right? This took years and years and years. And I say that to try to give comfort to someone listening, but I also know how daunting that can sound when someone's at the bottom of the bottom and they're like, wait, I've got to get through this for another 5, 10, 15 years. And I know what I would say to somebody. Yep. What would you say to somebody that feels that way? And they're like, I don't even know if I can handle trying to get through this for another 10 years. Like it really took us a long time to get to where we are now.
For sure. And I think people forget that. They think, oh, well, I want to be where you are. Like, what do I need to do? No, it's more than 4 weeks or more than, getting on a certain supplement. Like it requires work.
Right.
For me, by far, one of the best things I think people can do is just do the next best thing.
Yeah.
What's the next best step you can take? Rather than trying to focus so much on the future, just what's the next best thing you can do? Focus on that.
Yeah.
And I feel like that calms the mind a bit. And when you focus on taking the next best action step, it'll perpetuate.
Right.
And then you'll build that resilience and then that confidence. And then before you know it, it's a snowball effect. And you're like, wow, you can look back and say, look at what all I've accomplished. Like, I'm okay.
Right. And you're going to go through year after year anyways. So why not spend that time doing the work?
Exactly.
What else are you going to do?
Right.
You're going to sit there in your misery for the next 10 years?
Yep.
Well, you might as well put one foot in front of the other and really, really try.
Right.
And know that you're going to fall down and know that that's okay. And like, know that you're not alone. But also ask for help.
Yes.
I was so ashamed. And so obviously my parents knew what I was going through, but really other than one close friend and a couple of my ex-boyfriends, no one really knew. And it's not that you have to like go display it and like post it on Instagram, but find a couple people and reach out to them and trust them and be able to find someone that you can just sit there and be like, today fucking sucks. And they say, I get it.
Yeah.
And not like, oh, it's going to be okay. And you're such a strong person. Like no one that's depressed or going through any of these issues needs to hear that.
No.
That doesn't help.
It doesn't. Just by saying, listen, I got you. Tell me what you need from me. I'm here to support you.
Yeah.
Or
like,
whatever.
let's go for a walk or let's go. And that's what I love. Like after sharing my journey and my story and doing this work, like people are like, hey, can you grab coffee? I had someone yesterday be like, hey, can you grab coffee? And I'm like, yes, like I'm happy to. Absolutely. And she's coming off her medications and going through the process. And I'm like, you don't even know me from anyone. So thank you for trusting me. So being able to find those people in your life and knowing like it can be a stranger or it can be just, a therapist. You don't have to go to I think psychologist and psychiatrist. When people hear that word, it's really intimidating.
I know.
It's really intimidating. So if it's not a friend or, an acquaintance, like just find a therapist or a counselor.
I agree. Yeah.
And ask people like 8 out of 10 people walking this earth that you come in contact probably have a therapist.
Absolutely. I 100%. And I try to be cognizant of that too, where I don't want to dump all my stuff on people.
Right.
And so, yes, I have my friends I confide in,
right.
but it's a give and take. Right. And so you need that. And I think that's important too, is if you're really, really struggling, I think it's amazing to have friends that you can talk to and be open about.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you need a third party point of view so you can get your stuff out without overwhelming your close circle where it drains them, know?
Right.
So
I had a friend tell me that recently. They're like, cause I went through some things, last year and, I was really, I had to give myself props because I'm like, wow, you're aware that you're going through this. Whereas the old me would have just kind of like spiraled.
Yep.
But she did say, you know, like, maybe you need to tell, like, we can only do so much as friends. And in that moment, like, it stung because it's like, oh, I'm going to have to go back to that. But I'm like, okay, you know this, this place, you're going to be fine. You're going to get out of it. And she was right. And I had to take that ego down.
Yeah.
And be like, okay. I have to spend some time finding someone and do the work. And it is what it is. And I've been there before. And it's always going to be there.
Yeah.
It's never going to completely disappear.
And you just have to be aware of it and just be mindful of, okay, there's some behaviors that are starting to repeat themselves. What's going on here?
Right. Right. But I love what you said about humor.
Oh yeah. You have to have it.
I wish, I'm a pretty funny person. At least I like to think so.
Yeah.
And in my most depressive places, I think I was almost even funnier because it was like a cover up. Like I didn't want anyone to know what I was going through. So people are like, wait, you're funny. You're happy. And I think of like Robin Williams and like all of these, so not to say like I'm on that or I was on that level, but if we can if you're in that place, watch a funny movie, go to a comedy club, go outside of your box.
Yep.
Do stuff where you can go around people and like let them make you laugh.
Yes.
I always wanted to be the person to do that for other people because I knew I was struggling. I wish someone had been like, wait. Let's get someone to make you laugh. Yeah. Maybe that's why I like all the stupid movies now. But
I love it. No, I love it. That's a great thing too. And that's, so if you're feeling a certain emotion, like find a way to have an opposite emotion.
That's an opposite.
That.
Yeah.
So yeah. And humor, like
sense.
I remember I'd be feeling down and I'd watch like funny animal videos or whatever, So yeah. So I'd love that stuff. Yes.
Yeah. Don't watch the animal videos with like Sarah McLachlan.
Oh yeah.
Watch
The ASPCA. Oh gosh.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, this has been like one of my favorite interviews by far.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah. And also too, like, I just want to point out too, is I love it when people share their story. Like, hey, Kim, I'm struggling. Do you have any suggestions? I'm dealing with depression. I love that stuff too. Cause it's all connected. Yeah. So, but yeah.
And we're experts on it.
I know.
Now we are.
Yes, I know. Right.
Everyone's like, why don't you go back and like become a therapist? I'm like, no, I've already got my degree. Like,
right.
All the shit I went through.
It's so true though. It's so true. It's so true. So my Instagram is kim.schaper, SCHAPER, website, kimschaper.com, Facebook, Kim Schaper. Yeah. SCHAPER.
And you have a website, you said, okay. And mostly women?
Yeah, mostly women.
Teens, 20s, 30s, 40s.
Yeah. Usually for like hormonal stuff, it's more 30s to 60s.
Okay.
But I help a lot of adolescents and young adults who are going through body image issues. So I'll do a lot of that too. And I've worked with men too. Like I love working with men, especially with strength training and stuff. And so I
Is most everything in person or do you do virtual?
Yeah, it's pretty much all virtual.
Okay.
And I have a few in-person clients I've been training for years, but the majority of my stuff is virtual.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for sharing your story.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
And being so open and honest.
Yeah,
and
you make it easy.
Cheers to life 6 feet above.
Yes, I love it. Cheers.
Thank you, Kim. Appreciate
it.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for listening to this episode of 6 Feet Above. I'm your host, Megan Armstrong. Subscribe so you never miss another episode as we release new interviews every Tuesday. And if you're enjoying the series, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Follow me on Instagram at 6 Feet Above Podcast to keep the conversation going. This episode is a product of Audiographies, produced by Denur Sapolia, edited by Jacob Smullian, and the music was by Keenan Willis. Funded by yours truly. I'll see you next time.